Brody's Cause just keeps grinding away. Cherry Wine is running late on the outside. Brody's Cause at the 16th pole, chased by Cherry Wine. My man Sam running huge from last, but Brody's Cause in front. Brody's Cause for Luis Saez to win the Toyota Bluegrass.
Welcome to the Paddock Pass with Brian Mariano on 104.5 The Team.
Welcome, everybody, this week to the Paddock Pass. Of course, I'm your host, Brian Mariano, and I am excited for this week's show. We have a big guest on the show today. NYRA handicapper Andy Serling will join the show later, and he's going to tell me I am crazy for the past few months going off on Songbird and Jerry Hollendorfer, but we'll get to that a little later. This, of course, the Paddock Pass. I'm your host, Brian Mariano, and as we look at this past weekend in Kentucky Derby prep races, it was a huge weekend. I have a very strong opinion on a few, and then one of them I have no opinion on at all. We'll touch on these with Andy a little bit later in the show as well. We'll start off with the Wood Memorial, and this is one I really didn't have much of an opinion at all. I didn't like the race anyway, and then you add rain to it. The track wasn't really that great all day. The race was run very slowly. And I was a little ticked off because I liked Shaggoff, thinking that you have the great connections there with Irad Ortiz Jr. and our boy Chad Brown. And as they turned for home, Irad goes inside instead of going outside, and that bothered me a little bit. All you want to do is get this horse in the clear, especially away from where all the water's gathering up on the bottom of the track. Get the horse outside and let the horse run. I thought that was a terrible, terrible decision by Irad, and of course, hurt the horse running fourth. We'll go over to the winner, Outwork, and I thought this horse kind of plodded along. He was up on the pace and was able to close out anybody coming his way. A huge run and a huge win by Outwork. So, I mean, you could look forward to this horse being maybe a contender for the Kentucky Derby, but I'm not sure that his style is going to work in the Kentucky Derby. So I really have no opinion in this race. I didn't like the way it was run. The sloppy track really turned me off. And I don't see any of these horses really having a chance. We'll talk about it over the next few weeks as we turn our head towards the Kentucky Derby for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Staying on the theme of a sloppy track, we'll go to Santa Anita, where Exaggerator just blew away the field. What a race by Exaggerator. He just demolished this entire field. But again, the sloppy track worries me a little bit because his 2 big wins came on sloppy tracks. When he won the Delta Down Jackpot, now he wins the Santa Anita Derby. And it makes me worry a little bit that if there's no rain on that first Saturday in May, that this horse won't have a chance. His style's good. I like his style, especially because it seems like there's going to be a lot of pace as we put together this Kentucky Derby field. And I just don't know if he can win on a dry, fast main track. And I just don't think he's as good as these. Yes, he showed up and won on Saturday, but More Spirit, I just don't know what to do with this horse. He just keeps running second, and I keep putting my faith in Baffert that this horse is going to come around and show up in a big way, and he just keeps plodding along, running second, running third, and he never really wins for me, so I'm not really sure what to do with this race. My opinion coming out of this race was Exaggerator was probably the best horse in the race, but he hasn't proven to me that he can win over anything but a muddy track, so I'm a little skeptical about that. And we'll continue to be skeptical until the field comes together and we figure out what the pace scenario is going to be when we get to the Kentucky Derby. Now, the race of the weekend and the card of the weekend was at Keeneland. What a great card they put together on Saturday. And I have to give a shout-out to my buddy Dom Clemens, who handicapped tremendously this week, hitting the pick 4 at Keeneland and hitting the Keeneland and Aqueduct combined pick 4 for a big score on a very nominal ticket. So I'll give Dom a huge shout out on the show, man. Congratulations, well done. I unfortunately put a ticket together and didn't have that much luck. So maybe we'll have Dom on the show one day and he can tell us all his secrets, because obviously it's working for him and not for me. This was a huge step up for Brody's Cause, in my opinion. I was all over him when he ran at Tampa last time in the Tampa Bay Derby, and he didn't show up. I think the pace in this race really helped him a little bit, but this was the answer I was looking for when me and Gaz were talking on last week's show. I was waiting for this horse to emerge as one of the contenders, and I think he did in this race. That was a huge win for him. But I got to give a shout out to Chad Brown's horse, My Man Sam. This horse ran a huge race, and I'm going to ask Andy later in the show whether he thinks any of Chad's horses have a chance, and I think you'd be surprised on what he says. Make sure you stay tuned to that. Another takeaway I have from this race is how bad Zulu ran. And I feel like this horse, if he's going to turn into maybe what Bayern turned out to be, where if he can get to the lead and have everything his own way, then I think the horse can win. But now, if he doesn't, then I don't think he knows how to run by horses when he's 2-3 lengths back. So that worries me a little bit. Another horse that will be up close to the pace, adding to that pressure where we could possibly see some record times running on the front end this year, as opposed to last year where they were plodding along, where you had Firing Line and Dortmund and American Pharoah as 3 running all the way around the track together. I don't think you're going to see that this year. And of course, we're going to ask Andy what he thinks. He's going to give us a few picks this weekend to see who he likes if you're playing the races at Keeneland and at Aqueduct. This, of course, the Paddock Pass. I'm your host, Brian Mariano, and we'll look forward to this weekend where there's a huge card at Keeneland and another one at Oaklawn Park. This is the last Kentucky Derby prep race, the Arkansas Derby, worth 100 points to the winner. And you're going to see a lot of horses coming out of that Rebel that was a month ago coming into this race. And this was the same path that American Pharoah took last year, winning the Rebel, winning the Arkansas Derby in hand. We're going to look to see if Cupid can ride that same wave. Very impressive winning the Rebel a month ago. He seems to be the horse to beat in this race. And I'm going to go and take a stand against him because I really don't think that having 2-1, he could even go down to 6-5, is worth in this race. I'm going to go elsewhere. I think Whitmore was troubled last time out. I think this horse can run a huge race here, and he's going to have some pace to run into. So my pick in this race is going to be Whitmore, but I wouldn't throw out anyone like Sudden Breaking News, another horse that need to step up a little bit, kind of like Brody's Cause did this past weekend. And, of course, I like Whitmore. I would use those 3, and don't count out a lot of the Oaklawn Park horses that have run here all year. So, strong opinion towards Whitmore. I might do a big exacta box, $10 exacta box. Whitmore and Cupid seem to be the 2 horses to beat here in this race, and we'll see how we do. 1045 The Team, 1045theteam.com, the Paddock Pass here. I'm your host, Brian Mariano, joined on the phone by NYRA handicapper and analyst Andy Serling. Andy, how you doing, man?
Good, Brian. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate you joining us. Now, the Kentucky Derby prep races are winding down. You were there for the Wood last weekend. What are your thoughts on that race?
It's hard it's frustrating and difficult when races, big prep races, as was the case both here and in California, run on sloppy tracks, because it's just hard to take them at face value when you're handicapping going forward. Even if the track comes up wet in Kentucky, one wet track doesn't necessarily equal another wet track. So with that being said, I take a lot of the results with a grain of salt. I do think the best horse won. Outwork did all the dirty work in the race. I mean, he was fighting in the pace. It was a contentious pace the whole way, and he got the job done. Having said that, that running style is not going to help him in this year's Derby, which figures to have real pace. It wasn't a fast race. I think the horse he dueled with in there, whose name escapes me because I'm getting old, Matt King Cole, I think he's going to turn out to be the better horse of the 2 of them going forward. It was just his second race of the year, though the same could be said, I guess, for Outwork. But I thought he ran very well. I just don't particularly like the race going forward. I thought it came up slow and hard to really be too confident about anybody going forward coming out of the Wood. So, I mean, unless somebody like Shagaf miraculously gets faster and he just hated the wet track, and I don't see any evidence of that, I don't necessarily think that anybody coming out of this Wood is somebody I would want to bet in this Derby.
So, touching on that, our hometown boy, Chad Brown from up in Mechanicville, has 2 heading to Kentucky. You just touched on Shagaf. Do you think his other horse, My Man Sam, has any chance in this year's Derby?
Oh, I think My Man Sam is far and away of the 2 the one you would want going forward. I think My Man Sam has much more than any chance. I think he has a real chance going forward. I didn't love his Bluegrass. I don't disagree with Chad that he probably was best in that race. Unfortunately, his running style puts him far back in these races. I don't disagree that he was kind of caught in back behind a lot of horses that sort of didn't have any horse at all, and he kind of delayed his run, or maybe Julian waited too long, though I wouldn't pinpoint anything on Julian. I think he rode him fine. And I think he ran well. The problem with that race is that it came up also very slow. And speed figures do matter. You know, people who like to knock speed figures knock them when when it's to their benefit to knock them, and then suddenly when the horses turn out, in fact, to be slow, they just sort of forget that that the horses were slow, and that race came up very slow. So that's really a problem. I'd certainly like to see both horses do well going forward. Dale Romans trains the winner, and he's a friend of mine, as is Chad. And I do think My Man Sam has a real chance, because in this Derby, there's going to be pace, and I don't know that we're going to have like an Orb-like meltdown, but My Man Sam is one of the horses that could definitely benefit from a pace meltdown. He's not going to have a problem with a mile and a quarter, and he's got talent. I would argue that, in fact, his race in the Bluegrass was probably the least good of his last three races. It just happened to be a very big race, so it got some attention. But I think he's okay, and he can win. Shaggoff, I've liked Shaggoff, but at the end of the day, he just hasn't run nearly fast enough. My Man Sam's been faster.
As you touched on earlier with the Santa Anita Derby, with there being a lot of mud, do you see if there's any rain in Kentucky that it's between Exaggerator and Outwork?
No, not at all. I think that would be a mistake. I don't think Outwork moved up on a wet track. Exaggerator's run well on wet tracks, but Exaggerator didn't win because of a wet track. He won because there was an insane pace, and the horse Danza Candy, who's the major player in the race, he was a runoff. You could tell right away he was running off, and he probably didn't particularly like the track, and he went much faster than he was, in his own benefit. And so that race just melted down, and Exaggerator was the one who was farthest back that had some run. So his performance was exaggerated. Outwork's performance in the Wood is better than it looks because he was on a quick pace, whereas Exaggerator's effort was not as good as it looks because he benefited from a quick pace that fell apart. So in a way, I think both efforts were actually kind of similar. And I think Exaggerator is a better horse for the Derby because he can come from behind, and Outwork has shown no ability to rate. But I don't think that one effort was dramatically better or worse than the other one.
A few weeks out from the Kentucky Derby, a lot of people around here have been talking about Nyquist. He's obviously going to be the favorite, the betting favorite coming up to the first Saturday in May. Is it him in the field like we were talking about last year with American Pharoah, or are there a lot of contenders that can take him down?
Well, you're talking to a guy who never picked American Pharoah, so I picked him once, the Travers, in the race he lost. So I'm not sure I would agree with any of that. He's going to be the favorite unless Cupid runs a giant race in Arkansas tomorrow. I think there's still the possibility that if Cupid ran a very big figure, because at the end of the day, undefeated, winner of the Breeders' Cup or not, Nyquist is not fast either. He's never run any figures, save his 7-furlong race when he beat Exaggerator that was over 100, the Beyer figures. And so I think there's a healthy dose of skepticism about his talents, and I think it's true. You have to question him. There's also the question mark whether or not he's going to excel at a mile and a quarter. Nyquist is a terrific horse, and he's a deserving favorite based on what he's done and what the others haven't done. But I think there are a lot of people, myself included, that are dubious about his chances of winning the Kentucky Derby. So even if favored, how much below 4-1 is he going to be, especially if Cupid runs well tomorrow? The only thing he has going for him is that nobody else seems to be stepping forward and running particularly well. And Exaggerator, who ran the big fig, is a horse that he's easily beaten in the past.
NYRA handicapper Andy Serling, you'd follow him on Twitter at Andy Serling. Now, I've been on Jerry Hollendorfer's case for 3 months now. I think Songbird, by far and away, is the best 3-year-old in the country. Do you think he missed an opportunity to run her in the Kentucky Derby, and could she possibly come back and pull like a Rachel Alexandra and run in the Preakness?
Starting from the top, one of the trainers, the toughest job of being a trainer is to take the heat for owners. I happen to agree with the owner in this case, but it's an owner's decision not to run this horse in the Derby as much, if not more, than it's Jerry Hollendorfer's. The owner, I thought, made a very, very good point. He said, if I run her in the Derby and she wins, then I've got to run her in the Preakness. And then if she wins the Preakness, I've got to run her in the Belmont. And now I've got a horse that's completely spent. And keep in mind, I don't know if he said completely spent, but basically he's suggesting it's a very rigorous campaign, especially for a 3-year-old filly. But let's keep in mind, the upside if you have a colt that's running the Triple Crown races is stud value. You've got a horse that wins Triple Crown. He's suddenly worth upwards of $100 million, as was evidenced by American Pharoah last year. There's only so much a filly or mare can be worth. She can't really be worth more than $10 or $12 million. And you say only, but that comes at a price. So it's not as though there are these untold riches to be gained by running the Triple Crown races for her. So that's probably the major reason, at least he stated, that he didn't want to run those races. And I think he's right. I've never gotten into this. Filly should be running in the Derby. Do I think she's the best horse? Probably. Do I think she'd win in a mile and a quarter? possibly, though this Derby wouldn't set up particularly well for her because there is pace, but I don't understand the need for these fillies to be running the race. They have the Kentucky Oaks. She could go in the Preakness. What do I think she's more likely to do? She'd be more reserved. They're going to take on boys. There are races like the Haskell. I suppose they could look at a race like the Travers, though a mile and a quarter might be something they're looking to avoid. But I don't fall into that camp of people that think she's supposed to be running against the boys. And I think the owner and trainer, certainly Jerry Hollendorfer, who has earned the right to make the calls, I don't criticize them for not running the Derby, and I don't really care that she's not running the Derby.
All right, Andy, I'm going to give you one pick this weekend that you can give us a price and possibly go to the window with a big bet and make a ton of money.
I don't know about that. I don't want anybody losing a lot of money on my picks at Aqueduct. I'll tell you a horse that is a little bit interesting on Saturday's card that I kind of like, and I think that's in race number 8. I like the 5 horse in there, True Bet. I think he'll be a fair price in the 5-1 range, and it's a horse that had significant trouble in his last race, and I think he fits this race very well. It's a contentious race, but I think True Bet in the 8th race on Saturday is a pretty good play. I can take a look at Sunday and see if anybody jumps off the page at me, and once again, looking for a horse that'll be a slightly better price. I'll give you a bit of a goofy horse you might want to take a look at in the 5th race on Sunday. That's the 4 Nona Joe, who gets a significant trainer change, I thought, to Rudy Rodriguez. And this is a horse that's had ability in the past, and I know she looks terrible on paper, but I'm wondering if she'll wake up first time for Rudy. So those might be 2 horses to take a look at.
NYRA's handicapper Andy Serling joining us. Andy, thanks for your time, man.
It's my pleasure.
There he goes, Andy Serling. Andy, thanks for joining the show, man. Best of luck to you guys out there betting the last weekend of Kentucky Derby prep races. Big weekend at Keeneland, another big one down at Oaklawn Park. This, of course, is the Paddock Pass. I'm your host, Brian Mariano. We'll make sure all your Pick 4 tickets are winning ones.